Velraxa was classified as a dead zone. Its atmosphere, toxic to unshielded lungs, hung heavy with radioactive ash from past orbital bombardments. The planet's surface was jagged, colorless, burned lifeless by plasma storms and kinetic warheads from both sides of the conflict. No cities, no settlements, just scorched dirt and rusting metal. Dr. Kane Mercer crouched beside the wreckage of a carry transport shuttle, holding his breath for a moment longer than necessary. His rebreather mask hissed faintly, filtering out the acrid air. He'd been on this rock for 3 hours, combing through crash sites left behind by last week's skirmish. Scavenger detail. Low priority, high risk. It was the kind of job they gave people like him, people they didn't quite trust but couldn't afford to lose. Ken wasn't a soldier anymore, not officially. He used to be field medical with Earth Alliance forces until a botched triage operation on Kepler Station left 6 troopers dead. He wasn't court-martialed, but the stain followed him. Now, he was a contractor, sent to ghost planets like Velraxa to gather anything useful from what the fighting left behind. His directive was simple: retrieve salvageable alien tech, tag wreckage for cleanup crews, and most importantly, avoid live contact with enemy survivors. Carry troops were not to be aided or engaged. If any were found alive, he was to report them and withdraw. But Kane had already bent a few rules just coming here alone. The shuttle's main fuselage had split open along its side, scattering debris across the valley. Bits of armor plating and scorched fabric lay half buried in the dust. He stepped cautiously, rifle slung on his back, a handheld scanner in his left hand, and a compact medkit hooked to his belt. The place was quiet, dead like it should be. Then he heard it, a sound from beneath a collapsed support beam, soft, irregular breathing. Not mechanical, not a comm signal. A person. He froze. A wave of tension rolled through his chest. He knew what he was supposed to do. Walk away. Mark the position. Send coordinates. Let someone else handle it. But he didn't move. Kane shifted the scanner toward the noise. No readable life signs. Too much interference from the metal. Slowly, he moved forward and pulled aside a bent panel with both hands. There she was, trapped under wreckage, her body twisted awkwardly, one leg pinned beneath a split bulkhead. Her skin was lavender gray, damp with sweat and coated in soot. Her suit, a black tactical mesh with reinforced armor pads, was shredded from the left shoulder to the hip, exposing long sections of muscle, dirt, and bruising. She looked like she tried to crawl free, but hadn't made it far. Carry. Recon class, judging by the design of her gear. Kane's stomach tightened. Her eyes opened, cloudy but alert. Pale blue and faintly glowing, they locked onto him. No weapon raised. No shout. Just awareness and pain. Kane looked down at her leg. The bone had popped from its natural position. Her thigh was swollen. It needed immediate realignment before the tissue damage turned permanent. He hesitated. He wasn't supposed to be doing this. But standing there, seeing the shape of her twisted body, the tremble in her hands as she reached for her belt, maybe for a weapon, maybe for painkillers, Kane acted before he thought himself out of it. "I'm going to help," he said, voice calm but firm. "Don't move." She blinked slowly, then stopped reaching for her belt. That was all the permission he needed. Kane dropped to one knee beside her. Every movement felt too loud. He opened his medkit, grabbed the auto-aligner and stabilizer foam. He worked fast, not because he was confident, but because he didn't want to let second thoughts catch up. He sliced away the rest of the suit fabric around her thigh and adjusted the auto-aligner over the muscle. She inhaled sharply through clenched teeth, still watching him. Her brow tensed. No threats, no questions, just the same thought echoing in both their heads. "Why are you helping me?" "Deep breath," Kane said. He triggered the aligner. The mechanical arms snapped the femur back into place with a hard click. She arched her back, her entire body jolting. A cry of pain tore from her throat, sharp, raw. Her arm shot out. Before Kane could react, her fingers grabbed his shirt collar, not to push him away, to hold on. Her grip was tight, unstable, desperate. She pulled him close, her face contorted with pain and something else, panic. Her voice cracked through a dry throat. Don't let go. Kane stared at her. For a second, everything stopped. The planet, the war, the protocol. He could feel her breath. Her body shook against the ground. Her eyes burned with more than just physical pain. She didn't want to be alone. Not here. Not like this. I'm here, he said. You're not going to die here. He stayed close until her breathing slowed. Then, without breaking her grip, he applied the stabilizer foam and sealed the tissue. The wound would hold for now. Kane wrapped her arm over his shoulder and carefully lifted her free of the debris. She winced again, face pressed into his neck as he adjusted her weight. I need a name, he muttered as he carried her past the flaming wreckage. She didn't answer. Outside, the wind had picked up. It pushed warm dust in swirling waves across the open valley. Kane spotted a rocky outcrop 50 meters ahead, somewhere to hide, at least for a while. His radio crackled with a faint signal from orbit. Earth patrols were inbound, running grid sweeps. If they caught him harboring a live carry operative, he'd be stripped of rank, gear, maybe worse. But when he glanced down, she was still clutching his shirt, and he didn't let go. Not because it made sense, not because it was allowed, but because somewhere between orders and instinct, Kane Mercer still believed in saving lives, even alien ones. He kept walking. Kane pressed his back against the sun-warmed stone of the outcrop and adjusted his grip on the alien woman. No, not just a woman. A carry recon agent. Still no name. But she was breathing more evenly now, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. He knelt slowly, easing her down onto the flattest patch of rock he could find. The wind howled past in short bursts, tugging at his loose equipment straps and carrying the faint whine of approaching patrol drones. He reached into his field pack and pulled out a thermal sheet, wrapping it around her shoulders. She flinched at the touch, but didn't resist. Her skin, slick with sweat, was cooling rapidly now that the adrenaline had worn off. The stabilizer foam had done its job, but she'd need fluid soon. Her veins were already showing signs of collapse under the surface of her lavender skin. Kane checked his scanner. Still no readable ID. The interference on this planet made everything unreliable. He looked down at her again. She was watching him. Not weak, just calculating. You got a name? He asked. A few seconds passed before she responded. Saraxa, she said. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. The accent was there, clipped, precise, carry military. But something in her tone was human enough to strike him. Kane nodded. Dr. Kane Mercer, Earth Alliance. Contract medic. I'm not here to fight you. Her gaze didn't soften. Then why did you pull me out? He hesitated. Because I couldn't leave you there, he wanted to say. But that sounded too simple, too emotional, and dangerous. Instead, he answered, because you were dying. Saraxa blinked. She didn't thank him. That was fine. He wasn't expecting gratitude. Her breathing slowed a little more. She let her head tilt back and close her eyes for a moment. The silence between them wasn't tense. It was necessary. They were both trying to figure out what this was now. Kane took the pause to reflect. He should have left, or called it in. Hell, he should have never entered the shuttle wreck in the first place. But something had stopped him. Not pity, not protocol. It was the way she looked at him in that moment, like a soldier stripped of everything except pain and instinct. He opened his medkit again and pulled out a saline injector. This is going to sting. Saraxa opened her eyes again, wary. But she didn't move as he pressed it against her arm and triggered the dose. She tensed, then exhaled sharply. Your patrols, she said. They'll kill me if they find me with you. They'll court-martial me first, Kane replied flatly. For the first time, something close to amusement flickered across her expression. It was faint, barely a twitch at the corner of her mouth, but it was there. Kane took out a hydration packet and offered it to her. She looked at it for a second, then accepted it with one hand. Her fingers were cold, even through the glove. She drank slowly. What were you doing here? Kane asked, breaking the silence. Why land a recon shuttle in the middle of an active combat zone? Saraxa didn't answer immediately. Then, crash landing. We were running from something. Not yours. That made Kane pause. Texari, he asked, naming the third, unaffiliated alien faction that had complicated the war months ago. She didn't respond. Kane leaned forward. If there's something bigger out here, I need to know. I'm not the only one at risk. Saraxa met his eyes. You weren't supposed to find me. I know. Another silence. Then she shifted slightly, grimacing as pain sparked down her leg. Kane reached out to stabilize her, but stopped when she waved him off. I'm fine. You're not, he said, calm but firm. You're running on survival instinct and maybe pride, but your leg won't support you for another 12 hours at best. If those drones sweep this sector, you and I both die. So either we move together or we stay here and hope for a miracle. Saraxa looked up at the horizon. The sun was sinking fast, casting long, blood-red shadows across the valley. Where would we go? Kane hesitated. Then he pulled out a topographic map on his pad. There's a dead comms relay bunker 6 kilometers north, buried under the rocks. Abandoned, but shielded. If we make it before full dark, we stand a chance. She didn't ask why he'd memorized that detail. She simply nodded. Then help me stand. Kane didn't say anything. He shifted beside her, braced her good side, and lifted her slowly to her feet. She let out a controlled breath, jaw tight, eyes focused on the ground. Her arm rested against his shoulders, lighter than he expected, and warm. As they started walking, step by step across the fading terrain, Kane glanced at her once more. You sure about this? No, Saraxa said, but I trust you more than the alternative. He didn't answer. He just kept walking, each step deliberate, every motion echoing the same thought he'd had back in the wreckage. He hadn't let go, and now neither would she. The wind picked up as they moved, slicing sideways across the valley in dry gusts that kicked up ash and stung their eyes. Kane adjusted his grip, shifting Saraxa's weight against his side to stabilize her limp. Every step on the uneven terrain pressed jagged pain through her injured leg, but she didn't complain. She gritted her teeth and kept moving, her breath sharp and measured. They had covered maybe a kilometer in the last 40 minutes. The relay bunker, buried beneath collapsed rock formations, was still another 5 away. Kane knew they wouldn't make it before dark. Not at this pace. Not without cover. And if the drones swept back through the area with infrared, they'd both be outlined like heat signatures on a firing range. We need to stop, he said finally. 5 minutes. Saraxa didn't answer, but didn't resist as he guided her toward a jagged rock cluster. She slid down beside him, her back against the stone, one hand pressed over her thigh. The stabilizer was holding, but Kane could tell she was burning through pain tolerance fast. He scanned the horizon again. No visible patrols. No hostile movement. Just the unsettling quiet of a battlefield after everyone's already died. You said your ship was fleeing something. Not us. Kane sat beside her, unhooking his water capsule and handing it over. Was it Texari? Or something else? Saraxa didn't drink right away. Her eyes stayed locked on the darkening sky, where the second moon of Velraxa was starting to rise, pale blue and scarred with orbital debris. Then she looked at him. We were tracking a carry transport that never responded to recall. The ship was broadcasting old Alliance clearance codes. Kane frowned. Why would a carry ship have Earth Alliance codes? That's what we were trying to find out. Her words hung in the air longer than either of them wanted. Kane felt a familiar, not build in his chest. If someone was trading codes across enemy lines, this war wasn't just about territory anymore. Something was happening above his clearance level. And clearly, hers too. You think it was a trap? He asked. Saraxa's jaw tensed. We were ambushed 2 minutes after entering Velraxa orbit. Our pilot was killed before we hit atmosphere. Whatever was here, it didn't care what side we were on. Kane looked out over the wreckage-strewn valley behind them. And the ship that went dark. Gone. No trace. No distress signal. It vanished mid-transmission. The realization hit Kane slowly. Whatever Saraxa's team had stumbled into, it wasn't part of the war. Or, if it was a part no one was supposed to know about. He felt his instincts tighten. This wasn't just about saving her life anymore. Something much larger was uncoiling beneath the surface. He leaned back against the rock and pulled out a flare capsule from his belt. It was standard issue, meant to be used in emergencies, but he wasn't lighting it. Not yet. He turned it slowly in his hands, thinking, why didn't you kill me? Saraxa asked suddenly. Kane looked at her. She met his eyes directly. Back at the wreck. I was a threat. You didn't know who I was. Why did you help? Kane exhaled through his nose. The truth had been circling him since he first saw her under the wreckage. Because you weren't pointing a weapon, he said. Because you were bleeding out. Because I've seen too many people die who didn't need to. And if I had pulled a weapon, I'd still have tried, Kane said. Probably ended up dead, but I'd have tried. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, quietly, you don't act like an Alliance medic. I'm not anymore. He didn't explain further, and she didn't press. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It carried a new kind of understanding. Unspoken, but mutual. After another few minutes, Kane stood. He offered her his hand. She looked at it, then at him, then took it. They moved again, this time with a better rhythm. Her steps were still labored, but more confident now. She relied on him, but not helplessly. Her pride was still intact, though cracked at the edges. As they crossed a ridge, Kane paused. In the distance, maybe 2 kilometers away, a faint column of smoke rose from the base of a collapsed ravine. He pulled out his lens scope. Not a crash site. A flare. Blue-coated. Not Earth. Not Carrie. Unknown. Kane lowered the scope. There's something out there. Active. Broadcasting. Saraxa straightened as much as her leg would allow. Coordinates? Kane checked. About an hour northwest, off our route. She didn't speak right away. Then, quietly, we need to check it. You're not in shape for another detour. If that's what shot us down, we can't walk away from it. You know that. Kane didn't argue. They adjusted course. As they moved toward the smoke, neither of them said it aloud, but both were thinking the same thing. Something had changed on Velraxa. This wasn't just war anymore. It was something deeper, hidden, coordinated, and somewhere in the middle of it, a wounded Carrie scout and a disgraced Earth medic were heading straight into it, together. Not because they trusted each other completely, but because something was out there neither side could afford to ignore. And neither one of them was letting go. The last stretch toward the signal was the hardest. The terrain shifted as they descended into the ravine. Loose shale, fractured obsidian plates, jagged cliffs formed from ancient tectonic trauma. Kane moved first, testing each step with his boot before signaling Saraxa to follow. She had one arm around his shoulders, her limp more pronounced now. The stabilizer foam had held for as long as it could, but movement had reopened stress lines around the joint. He could feel the tension in her body growing heavier with each meter. They didn't speak. The silence was functional, focused. Only when they reached a narrow ridge where the flare's smoke billowed from the rocks below did they stop. Kane helped Saraxa sit, her back resting against a natural stone wall. Her face was pale for someone with lavender skin, her jaw locked against what he guessed was a constant, throbbing ache. Still, she didn't ask for help. She just nodded for him to check it out. Kane climbed the final slope alone. At the top, the wind bit harder, cutting across the cliffside like knives. He crawled forward and peered down. Below, nestled between 2 collapsed canyon walls, was a down pod. Not a crash, an intentional landing. The exterior was clean, intact. But it wasn't Carrie or Earth Alliance. The hull markings were strange, angular, slightly organic in shape. He zoomed in with his lens scope. It was a recon beacon. Hybrid tech. The flare hadn't come from a distress system. It was a lure. Deliberate. Kane scanned the surrounding area. No bodies. No visible footprints. Just the pod and an open hatch leading inside. The interior flickered with low-power lighting, casting faint glows across the dirt. He climbed back down quickly. There's a pod, he said, crouching next to Saraxa again. Not ours. Not yours. Something else. She tensed. Show me. Kane handed her the scope. She looked for a few seconds before lowering it. That's scavenger tech. It's not military. Kane frowned. Then why the flare? To bait survivors, she answered. Wounded, scattered, maybe even command personnel. Someone's collecting. Kane felt the unease settle in his gut. A third party on Velraxa. One that didn't declare allegiance and used salvage tech to lure the desperate. It explained the silence from her missing ship. It explained why her shuttle was taken down so fast. But the most important question still remained unanswered. Why, he asked. Why would anyone want survivors? What's the plague? Saraxa didn't reply right away. Then, black market, intelligence extraction, biogenetics. Take your pick. Kane didn't like any of those answers. They both sat still, the wind scraping across the ravine walls. Then Saraxa shifted. I can make it that far, she said. Kane glanced at her leg. Not without tearing something. We don't know if there's someone alive in there. If this is tied to my squad, I need to see it. Kane hesitated, but he saw it in her face, the military discipline pushing through the pain. She wasn't letting this go, and deep down, neither was he. All right, he said. We do this together. Slow. He helped her up. Step by step, they descended the slope into the pod site. The ground was uneven but shielded from the wind, and the air smelled faintly of scorched resin, artificial, chemical. As they approached the open hatch, Kane kept his hand near his holstered pistol. He didn't like surprises. They stepped into the dim interior. The pod was small, narrow walls, a single chair bolted to the floor, and a command console stripped of all primary systems. Data cores were missing. Power feeds had been manually cut, but in the back, they found a sealed compartment. Kane scanned it. The biometric reader had been disabled, replaced with a manual override, done sloppily, like someone didn't care who found it after. He opened it. Inside was a body. Human. Female. Mid-30s. Burned scars along her arms. No uniform. Her breathing was shallow, barely perceptible. Kane leaned closer, checking vitals. She's alive, he said. Saraxa stood beside him, gripping the wall for support. Kane found an ID chip embedded beneath her collarbone and scanned it. His wrist pad flashed. He froze. Saraxa noticed. What is it? Kane looked at her, then back at the woman. She's Alliance Intelligence. Black Ops. Name's Commander Elira Voss. Saraxa's expression changed. Hard and unreadable. Your people. Not mine, Kane said quickly. She's way above my clearance. You think she was behind the beacon? No, he said, uncertain. But if she's out here, she knows what hit your squad. Kane ran his scanner again. No active wounds, no recent trauma, just extreme dehydration and heavy sedatives in her system. She'd been put under, kept alive, stored, like a specimen. He stood slowly. We need to take her with us. Where? Kane glanced at Saraxa. The relay station. It's still our best shot. Saraxa stared down at the unconscious woman, then looked back at the empty pod. Something behind her eyes shifted. Her suspicion wasn't paranoia. It was precision. We can't trust her, she said. Not until we know why she's here. I know, but if she wakes up and calls in a team, I'm the first one they'll shoot. Kane nodded once. Then she doesn't wake up until I say so. They worked quickly, wrapping Elira in insulation mesh and lifting her between them. Kane took most of the weight, but Saraxa steadied the balance. As they moved back into the open, the sky behind them was turning purple-blue. The air grew colder. Night was closing in. As they trudged forward, the burden heavier now, neither said much. But for the first time since the war started, Kane wasn't walking alone. Saraxa was beside him, and deep in his mind, the question formed. If Elira Voss had been left alive, who else was out there? And what the hell were they trying to build? By the time they reached the buried relay station, darkness had completely taken the valley. The second moon hung low on the horizon, bathing the canyon in a sterile, ghostly glow. Kane's arms ached from carrying Elira Voss. Her body had remained still, her breathing steady but shallow, too steady. Medically induced stasis wasn't common in the field. This was premeditated. Kane didn't like the implications. The entrance to the bunker was nearly invisible beneath a collapsed sensor tower. It took him 10 minutes to uncover the old access hatch. The keypad was dead, so he bypassed it manually with a fusion cutter from his pack. The metal creaked open with a sharp hiss, releasing a gust of stale, recycled air that hadn't been disturbed in years. Saraxa helped him carry the unconscious agent inside. They moved through a narrow corridor lined with dust-caked consoles and flickering lights. The place was stripped, clearly abandoned, but structurally intact. No active power grid, but the core was still warm, enough to run low-power functions. They laid Illyra on a padded bench near the emergency med station. Kane activated a limited diagnostic loop and locked her vitals behind a coded access shield. He wasn't going to take chances. Then he turned and looked at Saraxa. She was leaning heavily against the wall, jaw clenched, sweat collecting on her temple. Her body had reached its limit hours ago. Kane crossed to her without a word and knelt beside her leg. The stabilizer foam had begun to crystallize, no longer effective. Bruising had spread across her hip. She was close to a full muscle collapse. "I need to open this up," he said. Saraxa gave a slow nod, her body trembling slightly as she forced herself to stay upright. He cut away the last of the tactical mesh and peeled back the material. Her skin was slick with blood and heat, the exposed tissue underneath swollen and deep red. No fractures, but the muscle strain was severe. Kane injected a localized suppressant, then began cleaning the site. "You did this for someone you barely know," she said quietly. He didn't look up. "That makes two of us. I had orders to kill anyone I found alive after the crash. I had orders not to help anyone." They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the old generators filling the space around them. Kane finished sealing the injury with a regenerative gel and sat back on his heels. His body ached. His throat was dry. But the worst part was the gnawing uncertainty. He looked at Illyra Voss, still unconscious, still stable. "She's not here by accident," Saraxa said. "Carry intelligence flagged her 3 months ago. Operated beyond Alliance oversight. Rumors said she'd gone rogue." Kane shook his head. "She's too high up to vanish without someone signing off." Saraxa's eyes narrowed. "Then maybe that's the problem." Kane stood and walked to the console, tapping into the external sensor grid. One of the relays still worked. It showed limited topography, and more importantly, it showed movement. Drones. 3 of them. Earth Alliance class. Scanning patterns across the southern ridge, less than 2 kilometers out. "We got incoming," he said. 2 hours, maybe less. Saraxa looked at the screen. "They're tracking her. Not us. They wouldn't know we were alive. But she's tagged. Black Ops don't move without trace layers." Kane looked at the screen, then at Illyra, then back at Saraxa. "We need to wake her." "No," Saraxa snapped. "Not yet. Not until we know what she remembers. Not until we know if she's going to burn us both." Kane hesitated, then stepped closer to Illyra. He adjusted the monitor, scanned her brainwave activity. She was emerging from sedation slowly, consciousness returning on its own. "We don't have a choice," he muttered. Illyra's eyes opened. They were sharp, clear, not groggy, not disoriented. She looked at Kane first, then Saraxa, then the room. "You moved me," she said flatly. "Where's the pod?" "Gone," Kane replied. "You were alone. You were sedated." "I know," she said, sitting up with effort. Saraxa stood rigid at the far wall, arms crossed. She didn't take her eyes off the woman. Kane watched Illyra carefully. "You want to explain what you were doing on Velraxa? Why you were in a pod meant for biocapture?" Illyra didn't answer. She looked between them again, taking in the surroundings, judging the situation. Then she said, "I was bait." Saraxa stepped forward, fists clenched. "Voluntary?" "No." Kane tensed. "Then who put you there?" Illyra's voice was calm, too calm. "Someone inside Alliance Command. We were ordered to infiltrate a carry intel convoy. Then the orders changed. We were told to fall back to Velraxa. 2 hours later, I woke up in the pod. Everyone else was gone." "You were betrayed," Kane said. "No," Illyra replied. "We all were." The room went still. Outside, the motion sensor pinged. One of the drones had entered the outer perimeter, less than 90 minutes away. Kane looked at both women. "We can't stay here." Illyra stood slowly. "Then you'd better decide fast which side you're on." Saraxa's voice was ice cold. "I'm not on a side anymore. I'm alive. That's all." Kane looked at them both. He had saved Saraxa out of instinct. He had protected Illyra out of protocol. But now, he was caught between 2 survivors from opposing worlds, neither of whom trusted the people they once served, and both of whom were watching him for a decision. He finally spoke. "We go together. We don't split up, and we don't hand each other over." "You sure?" Illyra asked. Kane nodded. Because whatever's coming, it's not done with any of us yet. Saraxa's expression didn't change, but she said nothing more. Elira gave a curt nod. Together, they gathered what they could. No trust yet, but no more lies. And outside, the first drone passed silently overhead, its lens focusing, searching for the exact 3 people who no longer fit into anyone's plan. The drone's proximity alarm blinked red. Kane muted the warning, but kept the display live on his forearm. The unit's scanning radius overlapped the bunker's location by a margin of less than 500 meters. Earth Alliance Recon Class, short range, high resolution, equipped with anti-personnel tagging systems. Not surveillance. Cleanup. They weren't looking to rescue anyone. They've got our heat signature, Kane said, already pulling gear from his pack. Maybe not precise location yet, but they'll lock in within the hour. Saraxa was already on her feet, weight uneven but steady. She strapped a field knife to her hip and adjusted what was left of her suit. Her injuries had stabilized, but barely. She'd need real treatment soon or risk permanent damage. Still, her voice was steady. There's a back exit to these relay stations. Vents along the service tunnels. They run parallel with the valley floor. Elira spoke up, sharp and cold. You've been in a bunker like this before? Saraxa didn't bother looking at her. We all have. You forget the war's been going on for a decade. Kane cut in. How far do the vents run? Maybe 2 kilometers before the terrain collapses. After they were exposed, Kane turned to Elira. What's their protocol if they find the pod empty? They'll assume hostile interference. You'll be marked as combatants. Us. Elira met his eyes. You. Her. Everyone not in uniform. Kane didn't respond. He didn't need to. The room had already chosen its tone. Cold, urgent, untrusting. They moved quickly. Kane collected med supplies and charged a portable battery cell. Saraxa located the vent access panel behind a half-collapsed console stack. Elira downloaded something from the relay's terminal while Kane wasn't watching. When he noticed, she looked up. Sensor data, she said. Nothing else. He didn't press it. He had bigger problems to deal with. They opened the vent shaft 10 minutes later and slid inside one by one. It was narrow and lined with rusted support rails, barely enough space to crawl. Kane moved first, followed by Elira. Saraxa brought up the rear, her movement slower, more deliberate. The shaft was dark and humid, the recycled air thick with dust. Every few meters, the hum of drone engines pulsed faintly overhead. The shafts carried sound too well. One misstep and the whole tunnel might give them away. Half an hour in, Kane stopped at a junction. 2 paths. Left uphill. Tighter. Narrower. Right. Toward a fissure that opened into a ravine basin. Kane studied the map overlay. The ravine connected to a secondary crash zone that had gone unlogged in Alliance archives. That was strange. He turned to Elira. Anything you want to share about the basin? She didn't answer right away. Then, that's where the carry convoy was headed. Saraxa spoke from behind. My squad was ordered to intercept that basin. Kane frowned, and then both sides went dark. Elira nodded once. Because we weren't supposed to reach it. Kane's voice dropped. What's there? A pause. Then Elira said, proof. Kane didn't like the way she said it, but he had no time to argue. The drone ping returned, closer now. The first wave had landed near the primary hatch. Ground sweep units would follow. We go right, he said. They pushed forward through the shaft. The walls grew tighter, the metal warmer from distant geothermal vents. After another 20 minutes, they found the end, a vertical drop sealed with an old service hatch. Kane forced it open and dropped down first. He landed in soft, cracked clay. The basin stretched wide beneath them, ringed by jagged cliffs and scorched trees. In the center lay what remained of the unmarked carry convoy. 3 transport vehicles. Burned. 1 overturned. No bodies. Saraxa landed beside him. Limp more pronounced, but eyes sharp. She moved toward the center instinctively. Kane scanned the wrecks. There's no blast damage. No weapon signatures. Elira stepped forward. Because the tech inside wasn't destroyed, they entered the largest transport. The interior had been stripped of seating. Instead, Cages, small, reinforced, modular. Medical tables bolted into the floor. And in the center, a cryo case. Still cold. Kane knelt, wiping frost from the casing. Inside was a child. Small, blue-toned skin. Not fully human. Not fully Carrie. Something else. Saraxa stood frozen behind him. Elira moved past them both and activated the case. The vitals blinked green. Kane looked up. What the hell is this? Elira answered flatly. The reason both sides were sent here. Unauthorized hybrid trials. Gene manipulation. Alliance and Carrie factions running illegal programs off record. Using this war as a cover. Sarax's face darkened. We weren't told. None of us were, Elira said. And the child? A prototype. Part of a cross-species stabilization test. Whoever controls it wins. Kane stood. So, this was never about the war. This planet, it was a lab. Elira nodded once. And now we're all loose ends. Kane looked at the child, still unconscious, alive, unaware. Then at the burn convoy. Then at Saraxa. They were pawns in something much bigger. He'd saved Saraxa because it felt right. Now, that choice had pulled him into a conspiracy spanning both governments. Saraxa's voice broke the silence. We're not handing this over. Not to them. Not to anyone. Kane agreed. Elira hesitated, then nodded. We disappear, she said. Together. Kane looked at them both. No more factions. No more orders. Just 3 fugitives and a child that wasn't supposed to exist. Outside, the drone passed overhead again. But this time, it didn't find what it was looking for. They had already disappeared into the shadows of a war that was no longer what it seemed. The escape route through the basin narrowed into a steep gorge, half-collapsed and slick with iron-rich dust. Kane led the way, the hybrid child swaddled in thermal mesh across his chest. The cryo case had been too large and loud to carry. He'd made the call to transfer the child manually. It was risky, but everything about this mission had crossed the line from acceptable to impossible days ago. Elira followed with a modified pulse rifle scavenged from the wreck. She walked quietly, scanning the ridgelines. Her expression remained unreadable, but Kane noticed how often she checked her 6. She expected betrayal, maybe even planned for it. Saraxa brought up the rear, still favoring her bad leg, though she barely showed it anymore. She hadn't asked to hold the child, but Kane had caught her glancing down at him more than once. There was something different in her eyes now. Less calculation, more weight. Not just a mission anymore. Not just survival. The gorge twisted again and opened into a crater rimmed by jagged black stone. Kane checked the map overlay. They were close. Less than 1 kilometer from a concealed exfil point. A shuttle drop zone Elira had mentioned only after they'd left the basin. You're sure it's there? Kane asked. Elira didn't slow her pace. It's a fallback. Autopiloted. Hidden under a mineral shell. One-time use. And they just let you walk away with access? I never said they let me. That silence stretched. Kane shifted the child against his chest and kept moving. Saraxa's voice cut in, flat but direct. What happens when we get off this planet? Kane glanced back. You mean to him? She nodded once. Kane didn't answer right away. He looked down. The child's breathing was steady. Peaceful. Innocent. That word didn't mean much out here, but right now, it mattered more than the war. Elira, Kane asked, already suspecting the answer. If we hand him over, she said, he'll vanish. Dissected. Weaponized. Probably blamed on Carrie insurgents. That's how it works. Saraxa said nothing, but her face hardened. Kane stopped walking. No more missions, he said. No more secrets. No more sides. We decide this. Right now. Elira raised an eyebrow. You want to disappear. You need resources. Safe passage. You don't get that without trade. Kane stepped forward, his voice low and controlled. We don't trade lives. Elira held his gaze for a moment too long, then finally nodded. Fine. No handoff. But we'll need to go dark. Permanently. Kane looked to Saraxa. She spoke without hesitation. Then we vanish. They moved the final distance in tense silence. The exfil site was a flat stone ledge near the north ridge. At first glance, it was nothing but cracked terrain, but Alira found the sensor node buried beneath loose rock and activated it. Moments later, a section of the ground split open, and a sleek recon shuttle emerged from below the surface. No markings, no Alliance emblem, just a small vessel with clean lines and silent systems. It hummed to life. They climbed aboard. Kane laid the child in a padded rear bunk and activated a shielding field. The engine spun up, low, vibrationless, smooth. They were airborne within seconds, rising above the jagged skyline of Velraxa as the first flashes of light broke the horizon. Inside, no one spoke. The weight of what they'd found, what they'd chosen not to ignore, pressed down harder now that they were safe. For the moment, Kane moved into the cockpit and took the co-pilot seat. Alira sat in the pilot chair, eyes fixed ahead. "Where to?" she asked. He looked at the NAV screen. Coordinates meant nothing anymore. Orders were irrelevant. Alliance is broken. Nowhere anyone can find us. Alira entered a set of encrypted jump coordinates. The shuttle surged forward. In the back cabin, Saraxa sat beside the child's bunk. Her hand rested on the edge, not touching but close. Watching, guarding. Kane saw it from the cockpit. Something unspoken had happened between them all. Not friendship, not yet, but something real. A fragile connection built from shared betrayal, pain, and a single act of mercy that had rewritten all their fates. The stars outside shifted as the jump initiated. Velraxa vanished behind them, and for the first time in a long time, they were no longer running toward orders or away from them. They were writing something new, together. The jump ended in silence. No sirens, no red alerts, no pursuit, just open space, a region of unmarked stellar drift far outside the jurisdiction of any known sector. The navigation system blinked confusedly, unsure how to chart where they'd landed. That was the point. Kane had chosen these coordinates himself. A dead zone with no relay coverage, no trade routes, no reason for anyone to look. The recon shuttle stabilized its orbit around a small planet, untouched green-blue, wrapped in thick clouds and oceans. Scans showed minimal gravity variance, no known settlements, no terraforming history. Perfect. Kane stood beside the cockpit window, arms crossed, watching the horizon curve gently into atmosphere. Behind him, Saraxa walked in without a word, her gait steadier now. She'd recovered more in 3 days of rest than in the last 3 weeks of war. But her eyes still carried a quiet storm, watchful, always reading the room. "He'll be safe here," she said, nodding toward the child now asleep in a sealed containment crib in the corner of the cabin. Kane nodded. "We all will." Alira entered next. She'd barely spoken since the jump, mostly monitoring long-range scanners, scrubbing transponder data, wiping any trace of their route. She stepped up beside Kane. "No heat signatures on approach. No signals in orbit. This place is clean, and if anyone comes looking, we'll see them before they see us." Kane turned to Saraxa. "Still want to do this?" She looked at him with no hesitation. "The war took everything I was. I don't want to give it the rest of me." Kane understood. He had left behind his uniform, his orders, and the weight of every casualty that had passed through his hands. This wasn't about redemption. It was about building something outside the wreckage. Alira moved to the console and activated the descent sequence. "We land, we bury the shuttle, we cut all signals. After that, we live. Quietly. Off-grid." Kane glanced toward the back cabin. The child still slept, unaware of the blood, betrayal, and compromise that had made his existence possible. His pulse was stable, brain activity calm. No cryo needed now. Just warmth. Care. Presence. The shuttle entered atmosphere. Through the viewports, lush forests emerged, scattered lakes. Open skies untouched by satellites or gunships. Kane hadn't seen this much green in years. Not since Earth, before he'd shipped out to die for causes no one believed in anymore. They landed in a valley near a river bend. The terrain was rich, fertile, and quiet. No synthetic noise. No distant artillery. Just wind, birdsong, and the hum of the shuttle's systems winding down. They unloaded in silence. Kane carried the child. Saraxa helped set up the perimeter. Elira began stripping the shuttle of components they could use for power and communication. Minimal, secure, local only. By nightfall, a shelter stood between two hills, half dug into the earth for cover. Kane lit a small fire. Real flame. Real warmth. The kind of primitive comfort that felt more honest than anything a fleet medic tent ever offered. Later, the three of them sat outside, watching the stars reappear. Saraxa sat closest to the child, now resting in a cradle they'd built from scavenged foam and alloy. Her eyes followed his breathing as if tracking it with purpose. Kane leaned back, his legs outstretched, arms behind his head. "This isn't what I expected," he said. Saraxa didn't look away from the child. Neither was he. Elira spoke from the shadows. "They'll keep looking. Maybe not today, but someday." Kane nodded. "Let them." Silence settled again. This time it wasn't tense. It was full of air, of presence, of something new. Kane stood and looked down at the child one more time. "He needs a name." Saraxa finally looked at him. Her voice was soft, but sure. "Let's give him one." They sat around the cradle a moment longer. No orders, no factions, no politics, just three survivors, and the first new life any of them had seen born outside the rules of war. And in that quiet clearing on a forgotten planet, they began again. Together. The war hadn't ended, but for them the fighting had. And from the ruins of everything they'd lost, something living had taken root. Hope.